The slasher genre is one that is rife with cliches, tropes, and flaws. So people like to mock it and pick it apart. Well, I have one movie that no one's really talking about that I believe perfectly deconstructs the genre. Plankface is probably one of the most jarringly different genre films I've seen in recent memory. The film was released in 2016 and is directed by Scott Shermer, who broke into the independent horror scene with his horror drama picture Found in 2012, which in turn spawned a spin off film Headless in 2015, which he co produced. Most recently, Shermer directed 2018's The Bad Man, a horror film about human trafficking that is relatively nerve shattering despite its low budget and weak bits of acting and writing. So we've got a guy who's made some pretty disturbing and violent films and took part in the production of one of the most nauseatingly gory genre films of the last couple of years. And now we have Plankface, a film which, based on the poster and plot, sounds like your average backwoods inbred cannibal slasher exploitation kind of film. Now let's take a look at the poster. The poster features the titular Plankface brandishing an axe with a naked woman at his feet wearing a bunny mask, and the tagline, "Freedom is Wild." You'd expect the one in a million 80s, 70s throwback slashers produced since House of a Thousand Corpses and Hatchet did it and kind of started this gimmick. Now, don't get me wrong, both of those films are pretty good, and some of the films that fall under this blanket aren't that bad, honestly. Like Gutterballs, Terrifier, The Carver, 100 Tears, hell, there are even some good ones. The previously mentioned Headless, Your Next, House of the Devil, although that's not too much of a slasher film, It Follows, and Frontiers. Some of those films even went for a kind of self parody approach, like The Final Girls, Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, and You Might Be the Killer. But that isn't what Plankface is. In fact, Plankface isn't even a slasher film, nor is it a self aware meta-comedy, and it isn't a backwoods gore fest on par with Escape from Cannibal Farm. It's a straight faced horror film with quasi art house touches that is a deconstruction of exploitation and slasher film tropes while also working as a prequel to a slasher film series we will most likely never see. Plankface is a very different film, and before I spoil it to hell and back, I really recommend horror fans see it. Plankface centers on a guy named Max who was recently released from prison, and he goes on a camping trip with his girlfriend, only to be attacked by a dude named Rex who rapes his girlfriend after Max kills Rex by sodomizing him with a knife and slitting his throat. Max is then knocked out by a woman in a bunny mask whom he saw sneaking around the forest earlier. With his girlfriend presumed to be dead, he's taken to an abandoned house in the woods. It is at this point that the quasi art house and or non-traditional stuff starts to show up. Almost all of the English dialogue from this point on stops, other than Max begging for his life and the Farrell family's mother speaking a word or two. Almost the rest of the film is in the family's own Farrell language, which we are not given subtitles for. This means out of this 90-minute long horror film, 70 minutes of it are dialogue free. That is absolutely fucking wild. This is something that I've never seen before in a slasher film, but then again, Plankface isn't really a slasher film. The remainder of the film is made up of sex, torture, a couple of kills, some copious nudity, and Max's slow initiation into the family and transformation into the titular character of Plankface. Now, the old father of the clan, as he is referred to in the credits, is dying after a attack on a couple in the woods that is the opening scene of the film. Max is captured and made into the new Plankface after this guy, the old Plankface, dies. Part of Max's initiation into the family is a rather long scene that starts with forced oral sex, then rape, then implied pregnation, and then bathing in the river together. After that point in the film, pretty much every scene devolves into feral, dirty forest sex. Max is never really physically tortured in some gruesome way by the family. His foot is nailed to the floor, but that's after he attempts to escape, so it isn't part of the planned initiation. The mask is burned onto his face, which can be considered physical violence, but other than that, all of the elements of Max's initiation and transformation are sexual in nature. There's an integral point in the film where Max literally has the chance to escape. He finds his old camp and cries, having lost his past life, but he chooses not to leave his current one either. When he leaves, the family seems genuinely saddened by his disappearance, and he returns after assaulting a motorist who comes across him, and the family tortures him, and the mother sets him on fire, while Plankface fucks one of them, and then they eat his corpse. Later that night, he burns his wallet and money, showing he's really given up on his old life and is now completely part of the family. At this point, we have our slasher fully transformed, but he hasn't really killed anybody yet, other than Rex, which that wasn't as Plankface, so it doesn't count. And his first kill is a very fitting one. He finds his girlfriend tied to a tree, presumably by the family. She realizes who's behind the mask and begs for mercy, but it doesn't work, and thus Plankface's first kill is the last in the film, and the final thing he needed to destroy to give up his old ways. From that point on, one would assume he became the next great backwoods slasher, as the family eats the brains of his girlfriend. Or should I say, axe girlfriend, am I right? I want to die. Now we move into a section of discussion that's a bit more on the analysis side of things. Now, sure, there's some gore in the film, and it has a reasonable body count. But after doing a bit of math with the body counts of 50 random slasher films, 25 of which being modern and 25 of which being classic, I've determined that the average for the genre is about 10 to 11 kills. Well, the body count of Plankface is a 6. All of the kills being partially on screen and off screen, so I'm just gonna go ahead and say it's about half and half. But out of those 6 kills, only 2 of which can be attributed to Max, one of which was before his transformation, and that was a revenge murder and out of self-defense, and the other one goes to him after his transformation into Plankface. So this is a slasher film where only 1/6 of the killings are done by the titular slasher. To take things further, there are about 12 scenes containing sex or nudity, twice as much as there is of the violence. These scenes consist of some sex, oral sex, masturbation, nudity, 2 rape scenes, some severed genitals, and a knife up the ass for good measure. Now, this excessive nudity and sexual content might not be too weird considering the genre it's in, but it's still a factor that this film seems to focus more on nudity and sex than the violence. It even has an hour-long segment without dialogue featuring the Farrell family running around naked or partially nude pretty much the whole time. And finally, on to the final element of this film's kind of deconstructive nature is the heavy focus on the killer's origins. Let's take a classic slasher film, for example, Wes Craven's Nightmare on Elm Street. The explanation of Freddy Krueger's origins takes up only about 2 minutes of screen time. Plankface pretty much tanks the entire time, and sure, other films have tried to do similar things, like 2017's Leatherface, or Hannibal Rising, or Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the beginning. That is, if we are going to focus on mainly slasher and serial killer films, then those are the ones I am familiar with. But none of those films would ever dare to feature an hour of its runtime without dialogue. And that is the biggest thing that makes it stand out as a slasher film prequel, is that we will never see a continuation of this story. It stands on its own, unlike the previously mentioned titles, which have to be compared to their predecessors, or sequels, I guess, making it probably the best horror film prequel ever, and quite possibly one of the best deconstructions of the slasher genre put to film.